a voicemail. It left me in shock. Her son-in-law's garage, right now, what they did to her daughter. I drove like a maniac. When I arrived, I was frozen. My son-in-law's mother was blocking the garage door. "Ma'am, don't go in. It's horrible," she pleaded. "Please don't do this," I begged. I pushed her hard until she fell. Then I ran and yanked open the garage door and saw a horrifying scene. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, like it, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're hearing my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it's reached. That night, it was pouring rain. I was sitting in the old armchair, knitting stitch by stitch, a scarf for Ethan, my grandson. I had just finished folding it, about to turn off the light to sleep, when the phone rang. The screen lit up, and the name Doris appeared. She's Valerie's neighbor, a kind woman who often helps me paint pictures at the art club. It was late, almost 11 p.m., so I thought she must have dialed the wrong number. I put the phone down, deciding to call her back the next morning, but in less than a minute, it rang again. This time, it was a voicemail. Something about it made my heart drop. I opened the message. Doris's voice sounded shaky, choked, with the wind and rain in the background. "Isabel, the garage at your son-in-law's house. Right now, what they've done to your daughter." Her words were cut off by a sob, then a muffled cry. I didn't clearly hear the rest, but every word was like a dagger in my soul. The ball of yarn in my hands fell to the floor, rolling under the table. I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time to put on decent clothes. I just quickly buttoned up the old jacket hanging on the chair. My heart pounded fiercely as if it wanted to escape my chest. I rushed out. My hands were trembling so much that the car keys clattered to the floor. I bent to pick them up, my mind blank with only one thought. Valerie, my only daughter, is in danger. I didn't know what was happening, but Doris's voice, her sobs, echoed in my head like a warning. I drove through the torrential rain. The wipers squeaked on the windshield and still couldn't clear the curtain of water before my eyes. I gripped the steering wheel tightly to stop my hands from shaking, but my breathing was ragged as if I'd been running instead of sitting in the car. As I turned onto the side street leading to Valerie's house, I saw flickering flashlight beams in the darkness. A group of neighbors was huddled under the eaves of the house across the street, murmuring. They looked at me with concern, but no one dared to speak. Doris was leaning against the gatepost, her face ashen white, breathing heavily and holding her chest. She looked like she had just emerged from a nightmare. I parked. I got out of the car, my legs shaking so badly I almost fell. The icy rain hit my face, but I felt nothing except the fear crushing my chest. In front of the iron garage door, Valerie's mother-in-law, Mrs. Miller, stood blocking the way. Her arms were spread wide as if to prevent anyone from entering. Her whole body was trembling, her eyes red-rimmed, but her gaze was firm. I didn't understand why she was there or why she was trying to stop us like that. Then I heard a cry, a muffled, painful child's cry. It was Ethan, my grandson. A neighbor was holding him, but the boy was struggling. He pointed toward the garage and, seeing me, shouted, "Grandma! Mommy! Mommy is dead!" Ethan's cry was like a dagger straight to the heart. I felt the world collapsing. "Valerie!" I screamed. My voice broke, lost in the rain. I ran toward the garage door, but Mrs. Miller stopped me. "No, Isabel, don't go in. It's horrible," she said, trembling, gripping my arm tightly. Her nails dug into my skin. It hurt, but I didn't care. I only wanted to see my daughter, to know what had happened. I pushed her with all my might and shouted, "Please don't do this." The garage door shrieked as I shoved it open. A smell of dampness, earth, and something else, a burnt metallic stench, hit me full force. I stood paralyzed, my feet rooted to the cold cement floor. In the dim light filtering in from the street, I saw a figure lying on the floor. Valerie's long dark hair covered almost her entire face. The flowered dress I had given her last week was still on her body, but now she lay motionless, like an abandoned doll. I am Isabel Adams, a 66-year-old woman, formerly an art teacher at a small high school until I retired. If someone were to recount my life, it would be nothing more than simple days between watercolors, an afternoon sitting by the window, knitting to pass the time. But if there is one thing that defines my entire world, it is Valerie. She is my light, my breath, the reason I get up every morning since my husband passed away. He, a kind civil engineer, left us in a terrible scaffolding collapse when Valerie was just in high school. That day, I stood in front of the rubble, holding her tight as I felt her body tremble, and I promised myself that from that moment on, I would do everything possible to protect her. Valerie grew up with a smile as radiant as the sun, sweet yet strong. She loved to paint, sing, and every time she laughed, I felt the whole world light up. I remember the nights in the kitchen, me teaching her to mix colors to paint carnations, and her telling me stories about school and her friends in that clear, bell-like voice. Those were the happiest days of my life, although it was never easy. I worked tirelessly teaching night classes to pay for her college so she could have a better future, and she never disappointed me. Valerie was always my pride until Mark Miller came into our lives. He arrived like a dream, a young, successful man with a confident smile and a voice as sweet as honey. He met Valerie at a construction exhibit where she was working part-time to earn some extra cash. He was a contractor, always impeccable, with that way of speaking that made everyone look at him. The first time he came to the house to introduce himself, he called me Mom, with a warmth that touched me. He brought a basket of embedded fruit, the kind I'd never seen. He even fixed the sink faucet without being asked. "Leave it to me, Mom. I'll take care of it," he said, showing a perfect smile. I looked at him. I saw Valerie's bright eyes and thought that perhaps my daughter had found happiness. On their wedding day, I watched her in her white dress, smiling like the dawn. Mark took her hand, looked into her eyes, swearing to take care of her forever. Neighbors said Valerie was lucky that he was a perfect man. I believed it too. I thought my daughter had finally found peace. They moved in with Mrs. Miller, Mark's mother, into a large house on the outskirts of the city. Soon after, Ethan was born, a beautiful boy with rosy cheeks and eyes identical to his mother's. Every time I held him, I felt my heart melt. I believed my life was complete. I just needed to see my daughter and grandson happy. But then everything started to change slowly, silently, like a tiny crack in a wall that I didn't notice. A few years after the wedding, I started to notice that Valerie's smile no longer had the same brightness as before. It was forced, as if she were trying to hide something. Once I went to dinner with the whole family. The table was full of delicious food. There were even honey-glazed ribs, Valerie's favorite dish since she was a child, but she just moved the meat around on her plate without taking a bite. I saw she was thinner, with sunken eyes and pale skin. I worried and asked her in a low voice, "What's wrong, honey? Are you not feeling well?" But Mark immediately intervened with a soft yet calculated voice. "Don't worry, Mom. Work at the new company has been very stressful lately. That's why she eats at odd hours." He took a rib and placed it on Valerie's plate, smiling at me. But that smile, now that I think about it, was a little cold, like a perfectly placed mask. I tried to dismiss that bad feeling. Mark always seemed attentive. He called me to ask how I was. He brought gifts home. He even took Valerie and Ethan on beach vacations in the summer. But every time I saw Valerie, I felt an invisible distance between us. She spoke less, laughed less. And whenever I tried to ask her something, she found an excuse to change the subject. "Mom, I'm fine," she would say, but her voice would tremble and her gaze would wander. I kept telling myself that maybe I was exaggerating, that all marriages have ups and downs. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One Sunday afternoon, I went to their house to play with Ethan. Valerie was in the kitchen cleaning up after lunch. I went in and offered to help her. We stood side by side, washing dishes, cleaning the counter, just like old times. But when she reached up to grab a spice jar from the high shelf, her sweater sleeve slipped and exposed a dark bruise spreading across her wrist. It wasn't a normal bump. It was large, dark, as if someone had held her tightly, too tightly. I felt my heart jump. I took her hand and asked in a trembling voice, "Valerie, what is this? What happened to you?" She immediately pulled her hand away, pulled down her sleeve, and turned pale as paper. "Oh, I bumped it on the edge of the table, Mom," she stammered, looking at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. "It's nothing. Don't worry." But her voice, the way she avoided my gaze, made me feel like someone was squeezing my chest. Another time I called her just to ask about Ethan. The boy had just started preschool and I wanted to know if he liked the new school. We were talking happily. Valerie was telling me that he had drawn a cat when I heard Mark's voice in the background. His tone was cold, sharp as a knife. Who are you talking to for so long? I immediately felt the tension in Valerie's voice. Ma, I have to hang up. Mark is calling me, she said quickly, and the call was disconnected. I stood there with the phone in my hand, feeling a heavy stone in my chest. I wondered if I was imagining things, if I was being too sensitive. But a mother's instinct is never wrong. I knew my daughter was hiding something, and I began to fear that Mark wasn't the perfect man everyone believed him to be. These small, fragmented memories slowly came together to form a terrifying image in my mind. And then the image of my daughter, lying motionless in the darkness of the garage, flashed like a knife tearing through my heart. Suddenly, I heard the familiar sound of an engine outside. A shiny black SUV stopped right in front of the garage. I recognized it instantly. It was Mark's car. He got out with a black umbrella in his hand, his face slightly confused upon seeing the crowd gathered. "Good heavens, what's going on here?" he asked with a mix of surprise and curiosity, as if he had just returned from a normal day at work. I looked at him. His gaze passed over me without stopping, but I could feel an impossible-to-describe coldness in it. Suddenly, there was a dry click. The old fluorescent tube on the garage ceiling flickered a few times and then abruptly turned on. The cold white light fell over everything, revealing it all clearly. I held my breath, my eyes fixed on the figure lying on the floor. But then, under that light, the truth appeared like a slap in the face. It wasn't Valerie, it was just a plastic mannequin, the kind used to display clothes in stores. Its skin was shiny, lifeless, one arm broken and lying to the side, the cheap wig twisted, revealing loose threads. An old, dusty electrical cord was wrapped around its neck, but it wasn't connected to anything. Mrs. Miller, who was standing at the garage entrance, suddenly let out a long sigh, as if a weight had been lifted. She slumped onto the step, hand on her chest, her pale face beginning to regain some color. Doris murmured between gasps, "Thank goodness it's only a doll." Her voice was shaking as if she had just escaped a nightmare. The neighbors around began to murmur. Some laughed nervously, trying to dissipate the tension. "What a scare," one muttered. "The youth of today, always with their silliness," said another. And little by little, they started heading back to their homes, leaving me there under a rain that was already beginning to ease. Mark entered the garage calmly as if nothing had happened. He gave the mannequin a gentle kick, making it wobble, and then burst out laughing, a loud laugh that sounded metallic, cold, and false to me. "Oh, come on, you all scared me," he said in a light, almost amused tone. "It's a prop for Adam. My friend, a theater director, asked me to test the lighting effect in the garage for a scene. A crime scene or something." He turned to Mrs. Miller, who was still sitting on the step, and looked at her with a hint of reproach. "Mom, I told you I was going to use the garage for a bit. Why did you make such a fuss?" I watched him, observing his perfect smile. But something inside me didn't add up. He spoke too smoothly, too calmly, as if it were all a harmless joke. But I remained there, motionless, unable to take my eyes off the mannequin. My heart was pounding, screaming at me that this wasn't a mere coincidence. And then, as Mark bent down to lift the mannequin, I saw it. A small yellow note stuck to the doll's chest. The handwriting was clumsy but clear. Valerie R. My heart leaped as if the whole world stopped for an instant. I looked directly at Mark, and I knew he also noticed my gaze. His smile faltered for a second, just an instant, but enough to see the tension that crossed his eyes. Fast as lightning, he ripped off the note, crumpled it in his fist, and put it in his pocket with a gesture so abrupt it bordered on violence. He didn't say anything. He just gave me a fleeting glance and then went back to talking and laughing with Mrs. Miller as if nothing had happened. I was still there, feeling a storm brewing inside me. The rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy, damp, and the burnt smell of the garage still lingered. I nodded to Mrs. Miller, forcing a smile to avoid suspicion. "I'm going, Jane," I said, trying to keep my voice steady even though everything inside me was boiling. I turned and walked toward the car, each step heavier than the last. As I sat in the driver's seat, my hands were trembling so much that I had to grip the steering wheel to calm myself. I looked at Valerie's house in the rearview mirror. The light coming from the window was faint, and I wondered if my daughter was truly safe inside. A few days later, I decided to stop by Valerie's house under the pretext of bringing Ethan a box of homemade cookies. I spent all morning kneading the dough, rolling it out, and baking the star-shaped cookies that the boy loved so much one by one. But the truth is, I didn't just go to bring cookies. I wanted to see my daughter, to make sure she was okay, that the look of fear I saw that night had only been a product of my imagination. When I entered the familiar alley, the midday sun shone brightly, but it couldn't dispel the feeling of cold in my chest. Valerie's house appeared before me with the small flower pot she always tended so lovingly. But today I noticed something different about the garage door. The old rusty lock I used to see every time I visited had disappeared. In its place was a modern electronic lock with a numeric keypad that emitted a faint blue light. It looked out of place against the aging wall of the garage, like a sign of a change no one had told me about. I knocked on the door, and Valerie came to open it. She was wearing a baggy sweater, her hair pulled back in a high bun, but her eyes were sunken, as if she hadn't slept for several nights. "Ma," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I handed the box of cookies to Ethan. The boy ran to hug my legs, thanking me happily. Seeing him, I felt my heart melt, but at the same time, an uneasiness grew within me again. Without thinking, I asked, trying to sound casual, "Did you change the garage lock?" Valerie was so startled that I saw her hand stop as she was pouring water. "Oh, yes, the old one kept jamming. Mark changed it for convenience," she answered nervously, fiddling with the edge of her sweater and not looking up from the floor. I wanted to keep asking, but her evasive gaze made me stop. I didn't want her to feel cornered. I didn't want her to shut down further. The following days, I tried to call her more frequently. I called her at any hour while making coffee in the morning or when watering the plants on the porch, just to hear her voice, to make sure she was still there, that she was safe. But every call ended too soon. "Mom, I'm cooking. I'll call you later," she would say in a low voice, as if afraid someone might hear her. Other times, "Ethan is fussy. Let me calm him down first, Mom." There was always an excuse, and I always sensed that tension in her tone. Once, while asking her about Ethan's preschool, I vaguely heard Mark's voice in the background, harsh, cutting. "Who are you talking to for so long, Valerie?" Valerie hurried, interrupted. "Mom, I have to hang up. Mark needs me." And the line went silent. I stayed seated with the phone still in my hand, feeling a heavy stone pressing on my chest. He was controlling her, I knew it. But I had no proof, only a mother's intuition and the painful memories accumulating one after another. That weekend, I took Ethan to my house, hoping that a day of playing with his grandma would bring back some joy. We sat on the sofa watching an old movie on TV, a quiet romantic story that I thought he would like. Ethan, crayon in hand, was coloring a drawing of an elephant while humming to the background music. I stroked his hair, smiling to see him so focused. But suddenly, a scene in the movie made me stop. The protagonist forcibly grabbed the woman's arm and scolded her for something trivial. I was about to turn off the TV thinking the scene wasn't appropriate for a child, but Ethan looked up, pointed at the screen, and said innocently, "Grandma, my dad does that to my mom too. He grabs her arm and tells her she's misbehaving, that she's not good, and that's why he has to teach her." The crayon in my hand fell to the floor and rolled under the table. I froze, feeling as if the blood had stopped flowing in my veins. I looked at Ethan, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my heart was pounding fiercely. "Does your dad hurt your mom, honey?" The boy nodded with an innocent yet very serious look. "Mom cries, but Dad says that when she stops crying, she behaves." I hugged Ethan, pressing him against my chest, but everything was spinning in my head. Valerie, my daughter, was being hurt, right in the house that I believed was the safest place in the world, and I, her mother, hadn't noticed. Pain and rage mixed inside me, but I tried to contain myself. I didn't want Ethan to see his grandma trembling with fear and fury. I couldn't just sit there. The next morning I went to the market, but not to buy vegetables, as always. I deliberately passed by the stall of Mr. Roberts, an old neighbor who had been a fishing friend of my late husband. Mr. Roberts was a retired police investigator, but his eyes were still sharp and his voice firm, the kind that inspires confidence. I pretended to stop to choose some cilantro and lowered my voice. "Mr. Roberts, I have something to ask you about your experience." He looked surprised for an instant, then nodded and gestured for me to follow him to a corner behind the stall, under the shade of an old almond tree. I told him everything, brief but clear. The mannequin in the garage, the paper with Valerie's name, the new electronic lock, and Ethan's naive but painful words. I spoke while squeezing the bunch of cilantro as if it were the only thing keeping me standing. Mr. Roberts listened without interrupting, but I saw the relaxed expression on his face gradually disappear. He placed the cilantro on the table and looked me straight in the eyes with a coldness that reminded me of his working days. I know the type of man Mark is, he said firmly. They always smile, but they carry a knife in their back. Calm down, Isabel. Don't do anything to make him suspicious. Pretend nothing's wrong. Let me figure it out. These kinds of people always leave trails. One Tuesday afternoon, I was watering the orchids on the porch, trying to keep my mind occupied. The drops fell on the leaves, but my head was still as cloudy as that night in the Grecias. Suddenly, the phone vibrated, and I was startled. Mrs. Miller's number, Valerie's mother-in-law, appeared on the screen. Her voice on the other end sounded agitated, almost pleading. Isabel, are you home? I have to leave town. My cousin was just hospitalized. Mark went to dinner with his partners and took Valerie. They'll surely return late. She paused, took a deep breath, and continued. Ethan is asleep. I don't want to wake him. Could you come watch him for a couple of hours? I'll be back as soon as I can. My heart skipped a beat. This was the opportunity, a unique chance to enter that house and look for a clue, anything that could explain the doubts that were consuming me. I tried to sound calm. Of course, Jane, I'm on my way. But inside, I felt like a soldier before battle, anxious, fearful. I put on a coat, grabbed the car keys, and 10 minutes later, I was in front of Valerie's house. Mrs. Miller was already waiting for me with a bag in her hand. Her face full of concern, she thanked me over and over before getting into her car and disappearing into the golden tones of the sunset. The enormous house was plunged into a strange silence, barely broken by the murmur of the wind through the trees. I went in slowly, with light steps, afraid that any noise might wake something that should remain asleep. I gently pushed open the door to Ethan's room. He was sleeping deeply with rosy cheeks and his lips barely moving, as if he were dreaming something happy. I stroked his hair, feeling a knot in my chest, thinking of everything he had seen, everything he had said about his mother. Rest, my little angel, I whispered, and closed the door carefully, as if afraid of breaking the silence that hung in the air. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. It was time to act. I walked straight to Mark's office at the end of the hallway, a place I rarely had access to. The room was tidy, in an almost cold way, as if it didn't belong to a house, but to a distant office. The oak desk shone without a speck of dust. Diplomas and certificates hung on the walls, praising Mark as an exemplary contractor, a successful man. But now, looking at them, I only saw falsehood. Those documents didn't tell the truth about who he really was. I started searching everything carefully, but quickly. The filing cabinet drawers were full of construction contracts, technical plans, and business papers that I didn't fully understand. Every time I opened a drawer, my heart beat faster, as if I were walking on a tightrope that could break at any moment. I moved to the desk, hoping to find something, anything that would explain my uneasiness. The first drawer was full of pens, clips, and harmless office supplies. The second with accounting ledgers, tightly packed numbers I didn't have time to read. But the last drawer, the lowest on the right, was locked. My heart hammered against my chest. I looked around, searching for something to open it. I ran my hand through the desk's pen holder, and at the bottom, my fingers touched a cold, metallic object. A small, shiny key, as if it had been hidden on purpose. With trembling hands, I inserted it into the lock, and every second felt like an eternity. A small click broke the suffocating silence. The drawer opened, and inside there was only one folder held in a blue plastic sleeve. I pulled it out, my hands shaking so much that I almost dropped it. The first line hit me like a hammer. Life insurance policy. Valerie Miller, née Adams. Start date was barely 2 weeks ago. The insured sum was enormous, so much that I felt dizzy, unable to believe it. And most importantly, the sole beneficiary was Mark Miller. I flipped through the pages to the end, my heart pounding fiercely. Valerie's signature was there, but it wasn't the soft, rounded handwriting I always saw on the birthday cards she wrote me. This writing was shaky and uneven, as if she had written it under pressure, or worse, it was forged. I felt the air escape me, as if the room had run out of oxygen. Mark had taken out a life insurance policy in Valerie's name, and I was sure she didn't know about it, and that amount was enough to pay a large debt or to start a new life. That thought chilled my blood. I took out my phone, trying to keep my hands from shaking, as I photographed every page of the contract, every line, every figure. The screen light illuminated my face, reflecting the fear and fury consuming me in my eyes. Just as I put the phone back in my pocket, I heard the familiar sound of a key turning in the main lock, so sharp it sounded like a warning. My heart stopped in despair. I quickly put the folder back in the drawer, locked it, and tossed the small key into the pen holder in the same spot where I had found it. I rushed out of the office and closed the door just as Mrs. Miller entered the house. She smiled, visibly relieved. Luckily, it was just a sprain. I can come back now. Thank you so much, Isabel. Her voice was calm, as if nothing had happened. She had no idea what I'd just done, or that in my coat pocket, I was carrying a phone with a secret capable of changing everything. I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice normal. It's nothing, Jane. Take good care of yourself. I greeted her and walked out to the car. As I sat in the driver's seat, I gripped the steering wheel tightly. I felt the phone in my jacket pocket as if it were burning, like a ticking time bomb. I knew I had just found a crucial piece of the puzzle. As soon as I got home, I collapsed into a chair, my heart still racing, trying to figure out how to confirm what I suspected. I decided to send Valerie a text message, trying to make it sound as normal as possible, like a random question from an elderly mother. Valerie, my friends have been insisting lately that I buy health insurance. I wanted to ask if you've bought any recently so I could use it as a reference. I typed it out, word by word, my hands trembling, feeling like every letter was a stab. I knew that if Valerie had signed that contract, she would tell me immediately. But if not, if she had no idea what was going on, then all my suspicions would be true. About 10 minutes later, the phone vibrated. I grabbed it tightly, my heart hammering against my chest. Valerie's message appeared on the screen. No, Mom. What makes you think that? We barely have any money. Mark is short on capital because of the business. I'm trying to save. Why are you asking, Mom? I read and reread the message. Every word hit my head like a hammer. Valerie had no idea about that insurance contract. The shaky, crooked signature on that document was fake, or it had been forced. I felt like I couldn't breathe, as if all the oxygen in the room had vanished. Mark had taken out a life insurance policy in my daughter's name with a huge sum, and she didn't know about it. What was he planning? That thought froze me inside, as if an icy hand were squeezing my heart. I stayed there in the darkness with the feeling that the world was spinning out of control. The image of the mannequin in the garage, the paper with the phrase Valerie R. and Mark's fleeting, nervous look when he crumpled it up. Everything appeared crystal clear in my mind. I remembered Ethan's words, the innocent voice of the child, when he said his dad grabbed his mom's hand and taught her to behave. I remembered the interrupted calls, Valerie's trembling voice, and the bruises on her wrist. All those previously loose pieces now formed a terrifying image. Mark wasn't just a controlling husband, he was planning something horrible, and Valerie, my daughter, was at the center of it all. The next morning, I met Mr. Roberts at an old diner on the corner, the same place where my husband and he used to drink coffee after fishing. The place was small, smelling of freshly roasted coffee, but the atmosphere felt heavier than ever. I sat down, my hands trembling, and placed the phone on the table. Mr. Roberts, I found this, I said in a voice so low it was almost a whisper. I opened the photos of the insurance contract. Every page was crisp on the screen. Mr. Roberts took the phone, his tired eyes, those of an ex-investigator, scrutinizing every line. He murmured in a grave voice, "That signature is undoubtedly fake, or it was forced. It has nothing natural about it." I told him about Valerie's message, that the girl knew nothing about the contract. Mr. Roberts nodded without surprise, as if he had suspected something for a long time. "You're not wrong, Isabel," he said with a sharp look. "I've been following that guy these past few days." He took out his phone and played a video. The image was shaky and blurry, clearly recorded from afar, but I immediately recognized Mark. He was in a dark alley, and two bulky men in black jackets had him cornered. One of them said in a threatening voice, "I'm giving you only one more week, Miller, principal and interest. If you don't pay everything, don't be surprised when your pretty work turns to ashes." Mark could only nod over and over, his face pale and his eyes filled with panic. Mr. Roberts turned off the video and looked me straight in the eyes. "He owes money to the mafia, a very large amount." I felt my whole body go cold. I looked at my phone screen where the insurance contract with its huge sum and Valerie's forged signature was still visible. Then I looked at Mr. Roberts's phone, where Mark was trembling in front of those thugs. All the pieces fit together like a macabre puzzle finally revealing its shape. The gigantic life insurance policy, the debt about to expire, the staged scene with the mannequin in the garage with the inscription, Valerie as a warning. I whispered, my voice trembling between horror and rage. He needs money urgently, and he plans to pay his debt with my daughter's life. 2 days after I found the contract in Mark's drawer, the phone rang late at night. Mr. Roberts's number appeared on the screen, and his voice on the other end was much more serious than usual. Mrs. Adams, are you home? I'm coming over. Is there an update? My heart was pounding, as if I sensed that whatever he was about to tell me would change everything. I only managed to reply, I'm home, Roberts. Come quickly. A few minutes later, he was at the door with an old laptop in his hand and a tense face, the sharp eyes of an ex-investigator now filled with determination. He didn't sit down or greet me as usual. He went straight to the point. Do you remember Bethany, the former secretary who worked at Mark's company, the young woman who used to go to his house to drop off documents? I nodded, feeling a chill run down my spine. Of course, I said in a hoarse voice. A pretty lively girl. What a shame. I heard she had an accident at the construction site half a year ago. I still remembered Bethany, the young woman with a bright smile, always friendly, when she brought papers to Valerie's house. When I heard about her death, I was sad for a whole week, thinking it had been a simple accident. But Mr. Roberts' gaze made me tremble. He shook his head with a grave voice. It wasn't an accident. He turned on the laptop, opened a video file, and explained, I asked an old friend who still works in the investigation unit to review the case. They closed it too quickly, without investigating thoroughly. It seemed suspicious to me. So I looked for security cameras around the construction site. He pointed to the screen where a black and white image appeared, with a lot of noise and poor quality, so much so that I had to squint to distinguish anything. This is the video from a camera on a house across from the side entrance of the construction site. The police ignored it because it only captured a small angle, and the image is blurry. The video started. The timestamp in the corner showed it was noon. Around 1 a.m., I held my breath, my eyes glued to the screen. At 1:05 a.m., a figure sneaked through the side door. Although blurry, I recognized the silhouette immediately. It was Mark. He looked left and right as if afraid of being discovered, and then quickly disappeared inside. I felt my heart beat faster, as if it were about to burst from my chest. Only 7 minutes later, at 1:12 p.m., Bethany appeared. She walked straight into the site with a worried face, carrying a small purse in her hand. Mr. Roberts and I sat there, holding our breath, attentive to every second that passed. The time on the screen advanced so slowly it was driving me crazy. 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Nothing happened. Then, at 1:45 p.m., Mark reappeared, emerging from the darkness of the construction site. This time he was alone. He walked fast, head down, and for an instant, he looked toward the camera. His face crossed the screen, distressed, tense, his eyes nervous, like a cornered animal. Then he disappeared from the frame. Mr. Roberts paused the video. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. Bethany never came out of there. At the end of that day, they found her under a pile of collapsed scaffolding. The police concluded it was a workplace accident. They said she had entered the site on her own, a place not meant for office personnel. I sank into the chair. A chill ran through my body as if my blood had stopped. I looked at Mr. Roberts, my voice breaking. Bethany, maybe she discovered his debts or something darker. He nodded, his gaze cold. Very possible, and he silenced her. A horrifying truth emerged in my head like lightning tearing through the night. Bethany's accident, the setup with the mannequin in the garage with the phrase Valerie R., the life insurance contract with the forged signature. Everything was connected, forming a dreadful picture I didn't want to believe. I squeezed Mr. Roberts's hand tightly. Tears welled up, my voice trembled. My daughter Valerie will be next. He's going to do the same thing. I felt as if the world were crumbling beneath my feet. Pain and rage flooded me. I wanted to rush out and hit Mark, but I could only sit there letting the tears fall in silence. That same night, after seeing Bethany's video, Mr. Roberts took me to the police station. We didn't go through the main entrance. He led me through a side entrance where we were met by Detective Santiago, a former student of his. Detective Santiago is a middle-aged man with a sharp gaze but a calm voice that gave me some relief amidst the emotional storm. We sat in a small room with a flickering fluorescent light on the ceiling, and I began to tell him everything. I handed Detective Santiago the phone with the photos of the life insurance contract and Valerie's forged signature. I recounted the video Mr. Roberts showed me, the scene of Mark trembling in front of the thugs. And finally, I mentioned Bethany's video, the young secretary who lost her life in an accident that I now knew for sure was not an accident. Detective Santiago examined every piece of evidence, and his face grew more serious. Mr. Roberts said firmly, "He already staged an accident to cover up a crime. Now he has his wife's insurance contract. He's up to his neck in debt. Is he going to do it again?" I clenched my hand hard, trying to contain the tremor in my voice. "I think he'll act in the garage. He changed the lock, and the mannequin thing wasn't a joke, it was a rehearsal." Detective Santiago nodded, and a determination lit up in his eyes. "We have to catch him in the act," he said. "There's not enough evidence to arrest him right now, but if he acts, we'll have what we need to bring him to justice." A plan was quickly devised. That same night, a team of technicians secretly approached Valerie's house. They installed a tiny camera hidden inside the old garage lamp and placed a hidden recording microphone carefully inside a toolbox. Plainclothes officers were stationed in neighboring houses, ready to act as soon as they received the signal. Detective Santiago looked at me, his voice grave but serene. "Mrs. Adams, I know you're very worried, but you must go back home and act as if nothing is happening. If Mark suspects anything, he will change his plans." I nodded, although inside I only wanted to run and hug Valerie and take her out of that dangerous house. But I knew Detective Santiago was right. I had to be patient, even though every passing second was like a stab. The next night, I was sitting at the police station in a small room with surveillance screens. Detective Santiago was beside me, radio in hand, ready to give the order. His message came just as I was holding a cup of cold coffee. "Everything's ready. Stay calm." But how could I be calm? My heart pounded fiercely. Every beat was a prayer for Valerie. On the screen, I saw Mark go down to the kitchen, cut the electricity to an area, and then turn it back on. He did it with complete calm, as if it were an everyday task. Then he went upstairs, and I heard his voice, soft but intentional. "Honey, come down to the garage and help me for a moment. It seems the light in this section is failing. I need you to hold the flashlight while I check the fuse box." Valerie, innocent and unsuspecting, followed him to the garage. Through the camera, I saw she was wearing a loose sweater and holding a small flashlight. Mark told her to stand next to a small puddle of leaked water on the cement floor. "Stay here and shine the light for me," he said, in a voice so sweet it chilled my blood. Then he walked toward a high-voltage switch, one I knew he had recently installed, designed for industrial machinery. He said casually, "I'm going to turn this on to see if that's the problem." I watched as his hand slowly lifted, about to touch the switch. My heart stopped. The puddle under Valerie's feet, the high-voltage switch, and Mark's cold gaze formed a nightmare before my eyes. At that instant, Detective Santiago ordered over the radio with a sharp voice, "Act!" The garage door burst open with a crash. The wood creaked like thunder. Plainclothes officers stormed in from all sides with flashlights pointing directly at Mark's face. "Police, drop the switch! You're under arrest!" Detective Santiago shouted. Mark froze, pale as paper. He started to struggle, shouting, "What are you doing? And I'm just fixing the electricity!" But his voice was trembling. His eyes betrayed his panic like a cornered animal. Valerie stood motionless. The flashlight fell from her hand and rolled across the cement floor. She looked at the puddle at her feet, then at the switch, and finally her gaze settled on Mark's terrified face. I saw the horrifying truth break through her eyes like a veil suddenly tearing. When an officer handcuffed Mark, Valerie fell to her knees, covering her face with her hands. Her cry tore through the night. It wasn't just any cry, but one of betrayal, of the deepest pain, upon discovering that the person you love, the one you trust, had planned your death. The hearing took place on an autumn morning, and the atmosphere in the room was as heavy as the gray sky outside. I sat in the front row next to Valerie and Mr. Roberts, who had accompanied me every step of the way. Valerie held my hand tightly. It was ice cold, but her gaze remained firm, though I could see the deep pain in her eyes. On the other side of the room, Mrs. Miller, Mark's mother, sat alone. Her aged face was marked by sadness and shame. She occasionally brought a tissue to her eyes, but she didn't dare to look at us. I didn't blame her. No mother wants to believe that the son she brought into the world could become someone like that. Mark was escorted into the room in a gray inmate uniform, haggard and pale. He was no longer the elegant, charming man from before, the one who used to call me Mom with a sweet smile and bring baskets of fruit home. Now, he just kept his head down with an empty gaze like a weak and pathetic shadow. I looked at him, and inside me, I felt no pity, only the rage and pain for what he had done to my daughter. The trial moved quickly because the evidence was too clear to deny. The prosecutor began by presenting the video from the garage security camera. The entire room fell silent when the screen showed Mark guiding Valerie toward a small puddle of water on the cement floor, and then slowly extending his hand toward the high-voltage switch. I heard a gasp among those present, and Valerie's hand squeezed mine tightly, as if reliving that terrifying moment. Afterward, the prosecutor showed the fake life insurance contract. A handwriting expert stood up and confirmed that Valerie's signature was not natural, that there were signs of forgery or coercion. I looked at my daughter. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she remained upright, her chin slightly raised, determined to face the truth. The third piece of evidence was the video Mr. Roberts had obtained, showing Mark being threatened by two men in a dark alley. The prosecutor explained that his enormous debt was the main motive behind his plan, but the most impactful evidence was the case of Bethany Rhodes, the young secretary who had died in a supposed accident at a construction site. The prosecutor presented a video captured by a neighboring house's security camera showing Mark entering the site with Bethany, but only he came out. A former colleague of Bethany's, who had worked at Mark's company, stood up to testify. She recounted that Bethany had discovered Mark was embezzling funds and planned to report him to his superiors. She told me she was afraid, the witness declared. Her voice choked. She said Mark had threatened her that if she spoke, she would pay dearly. The room fell silent, and I felt my heart clench. Then it was Valerie's turn on the stand. She trembled as she went up, but when she started speaking, her voice became firm, as if all her pain had transformed into strength. I lived in fear for many years, she began with a clear but emotional tone. He controlled everything I did, who I saw, who I talked to. He made me believe I was worthless, that I didn't deserve to be loved. She recounted the times she suffered psychological and physical abuse, the bruises she had to justify as falls, the humiliations in front of Ethan. Sitting below, tears streamed down my face silently, my heart breaking with every word. That night, Valerie continued, her voice breaking, he forced me to sign a document where I yielded all the inheritance my father had left me. I refused, and he hit me. He said that if I didn't obey, I would deal with him. I thought he was just threatening me. I never imagined. Valerie couldn't continue speaking. She broke down crying, her shoulders shaking. Now I understood everything, the bruises on her wrists, the calls suddenly cut off, the way she avoided my gaze. Everything had a reason. Mark didn't just want to control Valerie. He wanted to take everything from her, even her life, to pay for the mistakes he himself had made. Mark's lawyer tried to defend him, arguing that he only threatened her to pressure her, that there was no clear evidence of intent to kill. But all his arguments became useless in the face of the irrefutable evidence. The prosecutor closed his statement with a chilling sentence. Mark Miller is not only an embezzler, but also a man who attempted to take one person's life and planned to do the same to his own wife. Finally, the judge stood up. His voice resonated in the room. For the crimes of premeditated attempted murder, fraud, forgery of documents, and for directly causing the death of Bethany Rhodes, the accused, Mark Miller, is sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The gavel's sharp bang was a final sentence, putting an end to the life of a monster. Mark fell to his knees, his face pale, his gaze empty. On the other side, Mrs. Miller burst into tears, covering her face with trembling hands. I looked at her, and my heart ached. She was a mother, and even though her son had done terrible things, I understood the pain she must be feeling. Shortly after the trial, Valerie finalized the divorce and obtained full custody of Ethan. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least she was free. That night, my daughter and I moved the last boxes from her old house to mine. When Valerie opened one of them, she found a framed wedding photo, her and Mark on their wedding day. Her smile was as bright as the sun. Valerie looked at it for a long time. Then she took it out of the frame, tore it into pieces, and threw it in the trash. She turned to me. She hugged me tightly and buried her face in my shoulder, crying. "It's all over now, isn't it, Mom?" she whispered, her voice choked but full of hope. I hugged her hard, stroking her hair with tears in my eyes. "Yes, honey, it's really all over." Our life began to stabilize. Valerie, after so much fear and pain, started to find herself again. I saw her every day with a slightly more vibrant gaze, although sometimes I caught her silently staring out the window, remembering the past. And to help distract her and give her work, I used my few savings to open a small craft store next to the house. We sold knitted goods, watercolor paintings, and ceramics made by ourselves. Every day we had sat together knitting scarves, mixing colors, or molding small clay bowls. That work not only provided us with sustenance, but also a way to heal. Stitch by stitch, stroke by stroke. Ethan's crystalline laughter returned to fill the house like a melody that dispelled the shadows of the past. The boy ran, painted, and told innocent stories about his preschool. Every time I looked at him, I saw the Valerie of before in him, with her radiant smile and eyes bright as the sun. One sunny afternoon, while I was teaching Valerie how to mix watercolors to paint a carnation, the workshop door opened with a squeak. I looked up and saw Mrs. Miller standing there, timidly, holding a small basket of oranges. She looked much thinner than the last time I saw her at the trial. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her face was furrowed with lines of pain. Valerie and I looked at each other without saying a word, but I noticed she froze, paintbrush in hand. A drop of red paint fell onto the paper, forming a long line. Mrs. Miller walked in. Her voice trembled. "Isabel, Valerie, I'm sorry. I gave birth to and raised a monster. I lived with him without knowing it. I am guilty." She burst into tears, clutching the basket of oranges as if it were the only thing keeping her standing. "I don't dare ask you to forgive him," she said between sobs. "I just want you to let me see Ethan once in a while. He's the only blood I have left." Her words were like a stab, not of anger, but because I understood a mother's pain. I looked at her and saw myself reflected in her eyes, those of a woman capable of anything for her child, but helpless against his mistakes. Valerie stood up, put down the paintbrush, and without a word, walked over to her and embraced her. She hugged her tightly as if wanting to tell her that everything was in the past, that there was no longer room for hatred in her heart. I approached and took Mrs. Miller's bony, cold hands. "You are not to blame, Jane," I told her, my voice choked. "We are all mothers. None of us wants her child to become that. I understand your pain." In that instant, the three of us hugged and cried. Our tears were not only of sadness, but also of liberation, a way to wash away the resentment and bitterness. Just then, Ethan came running from inside the house, his little feet hitting the wooden floor. Seeing Mrs. Miller, he shouted, "Grandma!" and launched himself into her arms, enthusiastically telling her about the drawing of an elephant he had made at school. Ethan took his grandmother's hand and then mine, bringing us closer as if he wanted to mend the broken bonds. I looked at him, saw his innocent smile, and felt my heart melt. In Ethan's clear eyes, I saw hope. I saw a future. I saw an opportunity for all of us to start over. From that day on, Mrs. Miller became a regular visitor to the workshop. Sometimes she brought fruit, other times she simply sat with us, helping to package orders or watching Ethan so Valerie could paint. Occasionally, Valerie cooked the dishes she knew she liked, like the honey-glazed ribs she used to prepare for the whole family, and invited her to stay for dinner. I watched her and listened as Valerie continued to call her Mom in a soft voice, and I understood that the relationship between them had changed. It was no longer that of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, but that of two women supporting each other to heal their wounds. One night, I sat by the window watching Valerie laugh and talk. cheerfully with Mrs. Miller in the store, while Ethan ran through the yard chasing a small butterfly. Outside, the sun shone golden, warm, and clear, as if the darkness had never existed. I held the wool scarf I had started knitting for Ethan months ago, and the needle slid slowly through the threads. I thought of the days of horror we had been through, the times I thought I would lose Valerie, the sleepless nights filled with fear. But now, looking at my daughter and my grandson, I knew we had overcome it. The storm had truly passed, and the dawn had arrived, bringing light and hope. Looking back at everything we had lived through, I understood that life not only teaches us about loss, but also about the strength of love and resilience. There are pains that seem to destroy us, but it is precisely those that wake us up, that force us to rise stronger than ever. I understood that being a mother not only means giving birth to a child, but also having the courage to face the darkness, to protect them from the cruelest things. The truth can be hidden, justice can be slow, but as long as the heart remains firm in what is right, the light never goes out. I want everyone to understand that staying silent in the face of violence is being an accomplice to evil. Only when we dare to speak and act can we save those we love and ourselves. And above all, no matter how cruel life is, kindness will always be the only thing that can save us. The story you have just heard has changed names and locations to protect the identity of the people involved. We do not tell it to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own home? I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to be silent to maintain peace, or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion because every story can become a candle that illuminates the path for others. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. At this moment, on the final screen, I will leave two of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this instant.